Right. Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're going to pretty much wrap up the main things on our adventure park trigger. It's been a long journey to get to this point, but we're getting close. So last time we kind of knocked out the testing, and so now we're going to be looking at this service appointment. So what's interesting about this is that um, it's being called kind of a bit rogue, you know? We have a handler, it's not being used. Is there a reason why? Like, why not use the handler we already have? Why have a separate class? I usually see this in orgs that are start to collapse the design. You know, when the design reaches a certain point to where it's, harder and harder to change, harder to test, harder to understand, and then, you hire more people or you get some outside consultancy to come in and help. They're just going to do whatever it takes to make their job. They're getting paid. They have to finish. They have to deliver something. If they can't use the current design because it's so eroded and kind of defunct, then they're going to have to figure out something else. And the easiest thing to do is just to slap a new class into the org. And it's just kind of the way things go sometimes. It's not the best thing, but it definitely happens. So the first thing that is going to stand out to me before we go further is I just don't like this. If we have a before insert, I think that it should come before the is after. So let's just do a quick reordering of these. So insert, after, before update, after update, looking good. So this happens in both of our after contexts. After insert and after update, we're going to call create opening appointments. So let's go ahead and do a commit real quick, and we'll just reorganize trigger. It's pretty straightforward. And let's go ahead and look at the service appointment handler. Let's just see what it does, right? We're going to begin refactoring this and get an idea of what it's doing so that we can fold it into the current design, or maybe we'll say, wow, this is really brilliant and this is the best way to do it. We'll see. So this isn't a new list. This are new parks. And this is not an old map. It is old parks by ID. We have an insert list and an update list. And to me, this is already a bit of a red flag because we're mixing our contexts. We're calling this method from both an insert and an update context, and our code is mixing in the insert and the update. So could present some difficulties, but we'll see. So let's make sure that these are kind of close to where they're actually being used so that our code is a little bit easier to read. We can put it above it, I suppose. And then let's do the same thing for our update. And then the update isn't used for another part. So we can see there's a pretty clear separation already, that maybe this is the insert logic, maybe this is the update logic, but we'll see. We have a map of park ID to appointment. So this doesn't really meet our convention. So we're going to say this as service appointment by park ID. And let's just go ahead and double check to see how it's being set. And sure enough, the adventure park is the key and the appointment is the value. Okay. And then let's see where this is being used. It's not being used till down here. So there's kind of this pointless debug statement because we haven't done anything besides initialize it. So we can go ahead and remove that and add it in. And while we're here, we can clean this code up since it's kind of looking a little funky and hard to read. Make it a little bit easier to read. And this is not an each, it is a service appointment. We could just call it an appointment if we wanted to. Okay. So we're collecting adventure parks, and we're putting the ID, so account by park ID, that looks beautiful. Asset by account ID, that looks good. And now we have our insert list. So these are actually appointments to insert. So one thing now that we're kind of getting closer into it, let's just, I'll get to that in a second. So this is not an each, this is a new park. And this isn't an old record, it is an old park. So by now you should start seeing that these things matter. You know, it's foolishly simple-minded to just call it an each or call it a record or call it, Lord forbid, you know, well, I recently saw a code base where the Booleans were all BLN park active or something like that, you know, BLN park. And then it was like, it was a Boolean and the BLN standard for Boolean, but for a good amount of time, at least an hour before I asked someone who kind of had also suffered through that code base, I didn't know what BLN was. I thought maybe it had business context. You know, calling this a BLN, a Boolean, that's a Boolean, is really unhelpful and can be misleading. You know, instead we would want to do something like, is park active? You know, we don't have to guess that that's a Boolean. That is clearly a Boolean. It's true or false because we can read it like it's English. So hopefully by now you're starting to see that variable names matter, and fixing variable names is not very hard. You know, it's really not that hard. New park is way better than each. What is each? Each could be anything. We just saw a second ago that each was also a service appointment. So we're not conveying any business context or any understanding of our code when we use the word each. So it's a new park, an old record. Again, that could be anything, you know? Maybe in this context, it makes a little bit more sense, but it's still much better to call it an old park, and it's really not that hard to call it an old park, right? So old parks by ID, we don't need to check if this is null because it's coming from the trigger and we can guarantee that it has a value. So we will just remove this code, make it a little bit easier to read. And this is what I'm going to start looking for now, because we're talking about this extra handler that's bundling being a handler and a helper, right? It's not only doing the handling responsibility, it's also doing the helping responsibility, which means that in our case, it's providing conditional entry for processing and it's doing the processing itself. So in my understanding now that I see this, I feel pretty confident that this code should not be its own separate class, but should be folded into the handler helper structure that we had before, because there's really no reason not to. So, okay. So this happens when the park is active and the trigger is insert. So see here, we're getting into, you know, this muddiness. We should already know that it's on insert. We know that because the trigger context is going to determine it. So we're going to, you know, this is eventually going to be separated out. Let's see what it does. So we get our park. We're going to create a new service appointment. New. Let's just call this an appointment. And then we're going to set these values on it. And that's great. So one thing I would like to do, instead of doing this, like sometimes you have to, but I think in our case, we can take each of these. And I think it's going to be a little bit easier to read when we add this inside the constructor. And because it's an out of the box, or it's a field that we created, an S object, then we should get a default constructor from it. And I think it makes it a little bit clean. than seeing all these variables all over the place. Okay, so we created this appointment. And how do we do it? Well, we have a parent ID, and it looks like the asset. So it looks like the parent in this case is going to be the asset. It has a status. So the status is going to be dependent upon the date. So if the date is today, then this opening appointment is in progress. Otherwise, it's going to be scheduled. The earliest start date, we're going to take this date, and it looks like the earliest we would do it is 9 a.m. So that's cool. And we have a due date, which is the same thing, but we're going to add 7 days to it, right? So one thing we could do is that we could collapse these, but I think that's pretty easy to read. And our subject is opening day party kickoff. Cool. So this happens when an appointment is created and it's when a park is created and it's active. And when that's the case, then we're going to create this appointment that's going to, notify someone that, hey, we're having an open day kickoff. Either it's today or it's scheduled. The earliest date is going to be the day that the park opens, and it's going to be definitely due 7 days later. Okay. So we add those to our list, and let's see what this is doing. So the old park is not null. And so this is going to be our update logic, right? This logic has nothing to do with update. This has everything to do with insert. This has everything to do with update, where we're checking to see if there is an old park. We're checking to see if the value of the park status has changed. Is it gone from inactive to active? If it has, then we're going to need to schedule an appointment. But if we've already done this before, then it's guaranteed actually, that we've already created an appointment, so we don't need to do it. So again, this is our code kind of, doing different contexts, which we won't need to have this coupled so tightly. Okay. Okay, so in the case of the park IDs in the update, we're going to, looks like we're searching for existing appointments. Okay, so these are existing appointments. Let's call these existing appointments. Existing appointments. Listing appointment by park ID. And then we're going to call these appointments to update. This is a new park. This is an old park. Okay, so now we're looking to see if the park is not active, but it was active. So this is the case where we had a park that used to be active and has been deactivated. It has and exists, there is the existence of values, but in this case, this is never going to be null. The existing appointment by park ID is always going to not be null because we initialized it and we're not setting it as null. So we can remove that. We're checking to see if it's not empty. That doesn't really matter. What we really care about is whether this has an appointment already, because we're checking the park has changed from active to inactive, so we should find an existing park. And if we do, we're going to update its status to none. So this is a separate piece of logic, right? This is not related to this code, even though it's one method. This is called create opening appointments, but we're doing more than creating opening appointments. And that's confusing, right? Like that makes our code less stable and less easy to understand, because although we're calling it creating opening appointments, we're not just doing that. We're doing other things too. So this is where our separation of concerns is really important. this is updating an existing appointment that is no longer active, and we're going to set it to none. Okay, so that's one piece. Now we flip the logic. So this is the case where it is active and it wasn't active, which is what we were checking for previously. Again, what did I do? I broke something. Let's go back. I think when I made my old park, I screwed up the syntax. Yeah, I did. So we'll delete that. And then this is old parks.id get new park.id. Okay. It's not going to be null. It's not going to be empty. So we're going to pull the code out of this if block and remove it because we don't need that anymore. And this will fix my syntax. All right. Good. And then now we're checking for our recently active park. Again, it's not going to be null. We don't really care if it's empty. I mean, we care, but we can find out when we check contains. If it's empty, it won't find anything, so contains will come back false. And so in this case, we are double checking the status, right? So there is an existing park, which is confusing. It's like, why would there be a park here? Why would there be an appointment? If this is not been active on insert, then there won't be a appointment. And if it's become active, here it's going to always find this to be false and it's going to create one. But from then on out, it's always going to have this is active is going to be true and active is true. So this logic here doesn't make sense. It's probably, it doesn't harm anything necessarily, but it's confusing because it's never going to be used. This is code that's never going to be used. So I think we can safely remove this. And then we would just want to test it. But it makes sense to me because this is a newly activated park is not going to have an appointment, and we can guarantee it mostly. The only thing we don't know is if there's other places in the code base that could be creating appointments. So, from that perspective, we may not know everything about the code base, and so maybe there is another way that we create service appointments. So we could either take that as a takeaway. Maybe we can make a note here. So to do this code should never execute unless there is other automation that creates appointments, right? If there is, then we have to keep this here maybe if we want to update the status. So we'll keep it for now. And again, we are creating this. Now, we just saw how we created an appointment, and we can see that this appointment is the same as the previous one. We have a parent record that's an asset. This is an asset. We have a status based on the opening date. We're setting our earliest start date, our due date, and our subject. So this is the case where we can pull this code out and reuse it. So this actually create service appointment. It actually does create a service appointment. It passes those things in. And here we're going to use that to create a service appointment. And we're going to pass in the same thing as the assets, the account, and the new park. Okay. And then this isn't a new record. This is an appointment. There we go. And we don't really need this variable anymore, so we can cut that out and directly add it in, make it a little bit cleaner. And we can do the same thing up above, where this also doesn't need to exist by itself. So we may or may not have seen that code if we wouldn't have taken the time to move it into the constructor. But now we have reusable code, and that's good, right? So we're getting to a better place here. I think we're going to stop now, but we've basically taken a pass on refactoring this code. And I think the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new test, and then we're going to try to move this logic and incorporate it into our handler and our helper to make it even more consistent with the design. So yeah, I think we will do that next time. And I don't know, hopefully after that we'll be done. We'll see how much more we have to go. But thanks, hope this is helpful, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.